When the doctor inserted the speculum and looked inside, she dropped it, literally. It clattered to the floor as she stumbled backward, her face drained of color. What she saw wasn't a foreign object or a parasite. It was the girl's own flesh, rotting from the inside out. This isn't fiction. It happened. And it began with something as innocent as playing in the rain. Stick around, because what follows is a story of survival, sacrifice, and the terrifying power of something you can't even see. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe. It means the world to us, and it helps more people hear the stories that matter. In the quiet village of Koster, tucked away among the whispering birch trees of western Russia, the summer of 2018 was unfolding gently, like a story with no urgency. Days passed with the rhythm of nature, unbothered, slow, and simple. Rain was frequent that year, arriving not as a storm, but as a companion, a soft and steady drizzle that caressed the soil and polished the leaves until they gleamed under cloudy skies. Ivana had grown used to the quiet. At 45, she had long left behind the clamor of her youth and the loud sorrows of her past. A former battlefield nurse turned clinic assistant, she had seen too much loss to take peace for granted. After her husband's sudden death a decade ago, she had retreated from the city to Koster, with her only child, Kadosa, seeking a life that asked for little and gave enough. Kadosa was 13 now, more a young woman than a girl, though still carrying the wonder of childhood in her wide, thoughtful eyes. She had her mother's steadiness and her father's curiosity, always asking about the world, always looking just beyond the trees as if something magical might appear. Unlike most children her age, she wasn't addicted to screens or complaints. She loved drawing, the scent of old books, and the feel of damp grass under her feet. On one particular July afternoon, the rain returned after days of dry heat, falling like silk threads from the low-hanging sky. The roads shimmered with moisture. The trees swayed slowly. It was, by all appearances, just another gray summer day. Ivana was driving their old beige sedan home from the grocery store, humming softly to a Soviet-era ballad playing on the crackling radio. Kadosa sat in the passenger seat, legs curled up, her fingers tracing foggy lines on the window pane. Then, unexpectedly, she asked, "Mama, can we stop and play in the rain?" Ivana turned her head slightly, surprised. Kadosa wasn't one for sudden whims. "You'll get soaked," she said, a smile touching her lips. "I don't care. I've never done it before. Not like this." Ivana hesitated. The adult in her wanted to say no. Too cold, too wet, too impractical. But something in her daughter's voice, in the hopeful arch of her eyebrows, melted that instinct. When was the last time they'd done something purely for the joy of it? She pulled the car over near a clearing off the gravel road where puddles had already begun to form. The trees there opened up just enough to let the sky drip into the earth, creating mirrors of rain-speckled mud. Kadosa threw open the door before Ivana even turned off the engine. She leapt out, arms wide, face tilted upward as the rain embraced her. Ivana followed, more slowly, unsure if she was breaking a rule of motherhood by encouraging this. But then the laughter came. Light, bright, bubbling from Kadosa's chest, and Ivana laughed too. They ran barefoot across the muddy clearing, splashing into puddles that swallowed their feet. The water was cold, shockingly so, but invigorating. It painted their calves with brown streaks and left tiny bubbles clinging to their ankles. They spun in circles. They made up songs. For those few minutes, the years between them vanished. There were no bills, no loneliness, no ache of old grief. Just the rain and two souls letting go. At one point, Kadosa crouched to examine a cluster of frogs hopping around a deep puddle near the edge of the roadside. She reached down, letting one crawl onto her palm, laughing as it leapt back into the muddy water. She didn't see the small, greenish-gray foam along the edge of the puddle. Neither did Ivana, who was watching from a few feet away. Time passed. The rain didn't stop, but the wind began to pick up, and the trees whispered in a tone that felt a bit more urgent. Ivana checked her watch and gently called her daughter back to the car. They toweled off as best they could, giggling, leaving wet footprints on the cloth seats. The engine stuttered to life. The warmth from the air vents quickly filled the car, turning their dampness into steam. As they drove home, the laughter faded into a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who've shared something real, something they'll remember long after it's forgotten by everyone else. That night, Ivana tucked Kadosa into bed with a warm cup of tea and kissed her forehead, noticing only faint redness near her daughter's temple, which she assumed was from the wind. She didn't see the way Cadosa kept shifting her legs under the blanket, or the slight wince that passed across her face when she thought her mother wasn't looking. In the living room, Ivana folded laundry while the rain continued outside, tapping against the windows like a lullaby. She thought about how rare it was, moments like the one they'd just shared. She made a mental note to take more of them, to say yes more often. She smiled, unaware that something unseen had already taken root. In the darkness of Cadosa's room, beneath the quilt patterned with sunflowers, the girl lay curled to one side. A dull, persistent itch gnawed at the inside of her thigh, awkward and uncomfortable. She scratched lightly, then harder. The sensation spread, deeper, stranger, like heat under the skin, like something trying to burrow out. She shifted again, telling herself it was nothing, just a reaction to wet clothes, maybe some soap left from the bath. But the thought didn't comfort her. It stayed with her, even after she drifted into sleep. Outside, the wind carried the rain sideways, pressing it against the glass. And somewhere below the surface of memory and mud, something stirred. The next morning arrived with a strange stillness. The rain had paused, though clouds remained, swollen and heavy, lingering low in the sky. The earth was saturated, the air rich with the scent of damp soil and pine bark. Birds chirped cautiously, as if uncertain whether the storm had truly passed. Ivana awoke before dawn, as she often did, brewing a pot of strong black tea and setting out breakfast. She moved through her routines with practiced quietude, careful not to disturb Cadosa, who was still wrapped in sleep upstairs. The silence of the house was something Ivana cherished, a reminder that not all quiet meant absence. Some silences were safe, earned, peaceful, but by mid-morning the stillness began to feel unnatural. Cadosa didn't come down for breakfast. That in itself was unusual. The girl was typically punctual, often beating her mother to the table. Ivana climbed the creaky staircase and knocked gently on her daughter's door. No answer. She opened it slowly. The room smelled faintly of sweat and something else, acrid, almost metallic. Cadosa was curled tightly beneath the quilt, her forehead glistening with sweat. She stirred as Ivana approached, blinking slowly, her eyes unfocused. "You didn't wake me," she murmured. "You didn't come down," Ivana replied softly, brushing a strand of damp hair from her daughter's face. Her fingers paused. The skin felt hot, too hot. "I feel weird," Cadosa whispered. "My stomach hurts, and down there, it's itchy, burning. It's really bad." Ivana's chest tightened. She sat down on the edge of the bed and asked her daughter to describe the sensation. Cadosa hesitated, clearly embarrassed, but then the words spilled out, sharp stinging, itching that wouldn't stop, a sensation like pressure from within. Ivana's instincts as a mother clashed with her medical training. The mother wanted to believe it was something simple, a rash, an allergic reaction, maybe a mild infection from damp clothes. But the nurse in her listened more carefully, parsed the vocabulary, noted the tremble in her daughter's voice, the way her body was curled defensively. She asked to look. Cadosa nodded reluctantly. Ivana moved carefully, respectfully, using a clean cloth to inspect the affected area. There was no obvious wound, no bleeding, no discoloration beyond a slight redness, but the tissue was unusually warm to the touch, and Cadosa winced sharply at even the gentlest contact. "Maybe a reaction," Ivana said aloud, more to herself than to her daughter. "We'll try a cool compress. Herbal salve. If it doesn't improve, we'll go in for a checkup." Cadosa nodded, her eyes already drifting closed again, overwhelmed by fatigue. Downstairs, Ivana moved quickly. She brewed chamomile and calendula, crushed them with a mortar, and added honey and lavender oil to soothe the skin. As she worked, she remembered other times she'd prepared these remedies. Burns, stings, rashes from the old days. Her hands moved with precision, but her mind was elsewhere. There was something off about the way Cadosa had described the pain. By early afternoon, the redness hadn't faded. In fact, it had deepened slightly in color, and the itching was now accompanied by a strange, aching pressure. When Cadosa stood up to use the bathroom, she nearly collapsed. Ivana caught her just in time, guiding her gently back to bed. The girl was shivering now, her skin hot and clammy. Her lips looked pale, almost bluish. "I think there's something inside me," she whispered, eyes wide with fear. "I can feel it." Ivana's breath caught. She tried not to show alarm, tried to keep her face calm, her voice steady. But inside, panic was beginning to coil. "There's nothing in you, sweetheart. Maybe just an infection." "No," It's not that, it's moving. Ivana didn't respond immediately. She stepped out into the hallway and closed the door softly behind her, pressing her back against the wood. Her mind raced through possibilities: bacterial infection, urinary tract, yeast, maybe even an insect bite. But none of it fit. She went to the cupboard and pulled out her old medical bag. It was dusty but well stocked. She retrieved a flashlight, gloves, and antiseptic wipes. She wouldn't wait anymore. Something was wrong, and she needed a closer look. Back in the bedroom, she told Kadosa to lie back and breathe deeply. The girl complied, trembling. Ivana donned gloves and examined again, this time with light. What she saw made her heart lurch. The redness was spreading, now speckled with pale gray patches. The skin looked soft. Not soft like skin should be, but like overripe fruit. Moist, delicate, almost liquefying. Ivana froze for a moment. Then she wrapped Kadosa in a blanket, grabbed her bag, and helped the girl down the stairs, one slow step at a time. They didn't have time to wait. This wasn't something herbal tea could fix. Outside, the clouds had thickened again. The first drops of new rain began to fall as Ivana eased Kadosa into the car and slammed the door shut. She turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. She drove fast. Faster than she should have. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, but her eyes stayed fixed on the road. She kept glancing at the passenger seat, where her daughter lay huddled, sweating, silent except for the occasional, involuntary shiver. 30 kilometers. That was all. Just 30 kilometers to Ivanova Municipal Hospital, but every kilometer felt like an eternity. As they neared the halfway point, Kadosa cried out sharply, clutching her side. "It's moving," she gasped. "Mama, it's really moving now. Inside me." Ivana reached over, took her hand. It was ice cold. She squeezed it gently, her knuckles white. "Almost there," she whispered. "Just a little longer." The rain thickened, pelting the windshield in sheets. Wipers groaned under the strain. The road twisted ahead, dark and slick, lined with skeletal trees. In the distance, the lights of the hospital began to appear, tiny golden squares against the slate sky. Ivana didn't exhale until she pulled into the emergency bay. She leapt out, ran to the other side and opened the door. A nurse, already outside on a smoke break, dropped her cigarette and ran toward them. Ivana didn't need to explain. One look at Kadosa's face was enough. Within minutes, her daughter was on a stretcher, being wheeled into the ER. Ivana followed close behind, her own heart pounding so loud it drowned out the sound of everything else. Something was happening inside her daughter, something unnatural. And it had begun the moment they danced in the rain. The emergency wing of Ivanova Municipal Hospital was a modest place. Clean, efficient, but never meant to handle panic. It was used to broken bones, persistent coughs, maybe the occasional rural farming accident. But when Ivana burst through the double doors, drenched in rain, her daughter limp in her arms and pale as wax, the quiet machinery of the hospital began to shift into urgency. A nurse immediately recognized the signs: shock, fever, trauma, and called for the on-duty physician. But something in Ivana's eyes, in the way she said, "There's something moving inside her," made the nurse pause. She radioed for Dr. Vera Vusa. Dr. Vusa was a woman carved from discipline. In her mid-50s, tall and lean, her face bore the cool precision of someone who had long ago learned how to put emotion aside in service of action. She'd seen horrors, miscarriages, hemorrhages, abuse cases, but she treated each with the same clinical resolve. That's what made her one of the most respected gynecologists in the region. She entered the room calmly, clipboard in hand, hair pulled back tightly, but the calmness faded the moment she looked at Kadosa. The girl lay trembling on the examination bed, her eyes glassy with fever, lips cracked from dehydration. Ivana stood beside her, clutching her hand, her knuckles white. "She says she feels something crawling inside her," Ivana whispered. Dr. Vusa nodded slowly. "Let's take a look." She began with the standard external exam. Gloved hands moved with practiced care. There was no sign of trauma, no lesions, no wounds, only a deepening discoloration, subtle but ominous. The skin of the inner thighs showed faint gray veining beneath the surface, as though something toxic was coursing just beneath. The temperature of the skin was wrong, too warm, yet without the flushed redness of inflammation. It was as if the heat came from within, as though something unnatural had begun to ferment. "I'll need to do a speculum exam," Dr. Vusa said quietly. Kadosa gave a small nod. Her lips trembled. The doctor selected a pediatric-sized Peterson's speculum, sanitized it, and dimmed the overhead lights. She adjusted the exam lamp, angling it for a clearer view. Every movement she made was slow, gentle, precise. She could feel the weight of the mother's gaze on her, every second stretching into a slow, painful eternity. She inserted the instrument carefully, mindful not to add to the girl's suffering. Then she saw it. At first, she thought it was shadow. The darkness of the canal absorbed the light strangely. But as she adjusted the angle, her breath caught. A thin layer of tissue, mottled gray and slick with translucent fluid, covered the interior walls. Patches of it were peeling, like wallpaper soaked in rain, and beneath those layers the tissue was raw, uneven, eroded. Dr. Vusa leaned closer. She adjusted the magnification, switched on the colposcope's enhanced lamp, and the horror became unmistakable. The skin appeared eaten from within. She saw bubbling, tiny gas pockets fizzing just under the surface, a telltale sign of anaerobic bacteria. There was a subtle pulsing movement in the damaged areas, not coordinated like muscle twitching, but chaotic and random, like something trying to escape. A slow release of yellow pus seeped from one side. The smell hit her like a wave, sharp, rotting, chemical. Her body responded before her mind could catch up. She recoiled, knocking the instrument tray to the floor with a loud clatter. The speculum slipped from her gloved hand and hit the tile. She backed away, staggering into the wall, her hand clutching the edge of a counter. Ivana's voice cracked the silence. "What's happening? What did you see?" But Dr. Vusa couldn't speak yet. Her mouth opened, then closed. She took several shaky breaths before regaining her footing. This wasn't a yeast infection. This wasn't vaginitis. This was something else. Dr. Vusa stepped out of the examination room for a moment, her back pressed against the cold wall of the corridor, trying to steady her breath. Her palms, even through gloves, felt clammy. She had seen infections, she had seen tissue damage, but never anything like this. What she just witnessed was not simply infection, it was invasion. She returned to the room moments later, her face composed but pale. She spoke softly to Ivana. "We need to admit her immediately. Prepare for a surgical consult. I'll be back shortly." Ivana didn't ask questions. Her instincts told her everything she needed to know. She simply nodded and resumed whispering reassurances to her daughter, whose eyes had begun to flutter shut again from exhaustion and pain. In the adjacent wing, Dr. Vusa briefed the lead surgeon on duty, Dr. Pavel Malan, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 60s known for his steady hands and uncompromising precision in the operating room. A quiet tension rippled through the emergency team as she described the symptoms: necrosis, pus, gas bubbles, discoloration deep within the vaginal canal, fast spreading, necrotizing fasciitis, she said, finally giving voice to the terrifying possibility. "We can't wait. We need to debride immediately." Dr. Malan didn't hesitate. He'd treated flesh-eating bacteria before, though never in this context. The idea of such a rapid presentation, especially in a healthy young girl with no visible wounds, set off warning bells in his mind. But he nodded and began preparations. Back in the room, Kadosa was drifting in and out of consciousness. She was wheeled into surgery within 30 minutes. Ivana followed as far as the operating floor would allow, then stood alone in the waiting area, fingers laced, lips moving in silent prayer. Her mind was a whirlwind of medical knowledge and maternal fear. She tried to rationalize, tried to think like a nurse, but the image of her daughter's face, so pale and drenched in pain, overtook everything. Inside the operating theater, Dr. Malan, assisted by Dr. Vusa and a team of scrub nurses, began the procedure. The moment they opened the infected area, a hiss of gas escaped, an ominous, unmistakable signature of Clostridium or Streptococcus-induced necrosis. What they found was worse than anticipated. The tissue had already begun to liquefy, not just at the surface level but in deep pockets of muscle and connective tissue. Patches of skin and underlying structures were visibly detaching. Some of the infection appeared to have jumped across healthy areas, attacking regions that were previously undisturbed. The speed of deterioration was abnormal, unnatural. Debridement began. Layer by layer, the decaying tissue was removed, revealing the angry red of surviving muscle beneath. They worked methodically, cleaning, irrigating, isolating every zone of infection. 4 antibiotics were administered in tandem: vancomycin, clindamycin, and a broad-spectrum cephalosporin. For nearly 2 hours, the team battled the infection. There was a moment when Dr. Malan, despite decades of experience, paused over a patch of tissue that seemed to pulse on its own. He exchanged a glance with Dr. Vusa. Neither of them spoke, but both knew this case had already surpassed the realm of normal pathology. By the end of the operation, Cadosa had stabilized, but barely. A drainage tube was placed. Her body was wrapped in sterile dressings, and she was wheeled into post-op intensive care. Ivana was allowed in just long enough to see her daughter's face, pale against the sterile white sheets, before being gently ushered out again. In the hallway outside, Dr. Vusa met her. She explained what they had done, what they had found. Her words were careful, clinical, but behind her eyes Ivana could see the truth. "It's necrotizing fasciitis," the doctor said softly. "A very aggressive one. But we removed all visible infected tissue. The next 24 hours are critical." Ivana nodded, her hands shaking. She whispered thank you, and then sat silently in the corridor, staring ahead, unmoving. But the infection had not yet finished making its rounds. Later that evening, as Dr. Malan scrubbed out in the staff washroom, he noticed a burning sensation in his forearm. Dismissing it as the pressure of long hours and tight gloves, he ignored it. By midnight, a nurse reported redness in his skin. By dawn, it had spread 2 inches. In another wing of the hospital, Ivana, who had not left her daughter's side, began to feel a strange itching sensation. At first, she said nothing. She couldn't bear the thought that she might be falling ill while her daughter still lay unconscious. But by the next morning, the pain had deepened, and she finally confided in a nurse. Dr. Vusa conducted a quick examination. What she saw under the lamp made her blood run cold. A patch of tissue on Ivana's thigh, just above the knee, looked eerily similar to what she'd seen on Cadosa the day before. A second wave had begun. The hospital staff moved fast, but whispers were already spreading. First a young girl, then her mother, now the surgeon who operated, and each case showed signs of spreading necrosis, each faster than the last. Whatever they were facing, it wasn't ordinary. It was stealthy, aggressive, possibly airborne, and it had started with a laugh in the rain. The ICU room where Cadosa lay was dimly lit, its sterile silence broken only by the soft hum of machines and the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. Wires trailed from her arms like tendrils, tubes delivering life in measured drips. Her chest rose and fell with the aid of supplemental oxygen. Though the operation had removed the most visible areas of necrosis, the danger was far from over. Ivana sat at her daughter's bedside, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes locked on the still face before her. The girl's cheeks were pale, her lips dry, but her expression had softened from agony into a kind of exhausted emptiness. It was hard to believe that, just a day before, they had danced barefoot in the rain. Down the hall, the hospital's infectious disease team convened in a quiet meeting room. Dr. Vusa stood at the front, presenting findings from the surgery. Photographs of the infected tissue glowed on the projector screen. Gray, rotted skin, gas bubbles under the dermis, and sudden pockets of liquefaction that defied typical bacterial behavior. There was no clear point of entry, no obvious wound, no sign of immune response until it was already too late. The consensus was cautious but clear. This wasn't a standard case of necrotizing fasciitis. It was something faster, meaner, possibly environmental in origin. They had already ordered genetic testing on the bacterial samples, but results would take days. Meanwhile, precautions were enforced: isolation protocols, negative pressure rooms, biohazard suits for anyone entering the infected ward. But the damage had already begun to spread, quietly, insidiously. Dr. Malan, who had assisted during Cadosa's surgery, sat in his office later that night, rolling up his sleeve to examine a red patch on his forearm. It had grown. When he pressed it, it gave slightly beneath his finger, like ripened fruit. The skin was tender but more disturbingly warm to the touch, unnaturally so. Still, he hesitated. He was a surgeon. He had endured countless scrapes and strains, but a whisper of doubt had begun to settle in the back of his mind. Just yesterday, he'd laughed when he'd bumped his arm on the metal tray. Now, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had found its way in. Meanwhile, back in the ICU, Ivana felt a strange sensation creep across her thigh. A heat, a tightness. She tried shifting in the chair, stretching, adjusting her posture, but the discomfort didn't fade. It pulsed steadily like a buried ember. She brushed her hand against her leg and frowned. Her skin felt hot through the fabric of her pants. Her heart began to beat faster. But she didn't say anything. She couldn't. Not yet. Not while her daughter still lay silent. Not while she needed to be strong. Her own body would have to wait. That night, sleep did not come. Ivana sat by Cadosa's side until dawn, watching the monitors blink and beep in soft rhythm. The storm outside had returned in earnest. Rain lashed the windows in sheets, thunder rolled in the distance. She watched as a nurse checked the IVs, changed the dressing, whispered something to the other staff. Everything looked routine, everything sounded normal, but underneath, tension thickened like humidity before lightning. By morning, Dr. Malan's arm had swollen to twice its size. The red patch had darkened, and a network of blue-gray veins spidered outward from the center. He finally reported to the infectious disease team. They examined the site. The diagnosis was immediate and grim. He too had necrotizing fasciitis. A surgical team was prepped to remove the infected tissue from his arm, but there was already talk of amputation if the spread didn't stop. He didn't argue. In a hospital designed to manage life, it was rare to witness it unraveling from within. By mid-morning, the hospital's atmosphere had shifted from quiet caution to barely restrained panic. 2 confirmed cases of necrotizing fasciitis, one a child, the other the chief surgeon, was troubling enough. But when the 3rd case emerged, the whispers turned into fearful murmurs behind closed doors. Her name was Anya, 25 years old, a junior nurse fresh out of training, assigned to assist in ICU rotation. She had been present during Cadosa's first night of post-operative care, changing IV lines, checking vitals, adjusting pillows with gentle hands. Now she stood in the hallway outside the nurse's station, pale and trembling, clutching her left wrist. A small patch of redness bloomed just below her thumb, accompanied by a persistent burning sensation that had started hours earlier and worsened rapidly. "I didn't touch anything directly," she insisted. "I wore gloves the entire time." Dr. Vusa examined her silently. The skin was flushed, but beneath the surface, small bubbles had begun to form. She recognized them instantly. Crepitus, the sign of subcutaneous gas. The smell too had returned, faintly sour, sharp, like decaying citrus. Anya was placed in isolation immediately. Back in the ICU, Ivana sat rigid in her chair. The warmth in her thigh had escalated into throbbing pain. She could no longer ignore it. Her body ached with each breath, and her vision blurred every few minutes from the fever steadily building inside her. Still, she stayed. It wasn't until a nurse noticed her pale complexion and the sweat soaking her blouse that the alarm was raised. "She's burning up," the nurse reported. "Pulse is elevated. She's not responding clearly." Ivana was helped into a wheelchair and taken to an exam room. Her pants were cut away, revealing a hand-sized area of angry, reddish-purple tissue surrounded by gray halos. When the doctor pressed lightly, fluid oozed from beneath the skin. There was no cut, no wound, just rapid, unexplained infiltration. Another case, another confirmation, and the clock was ticking. In a matter of 36 hours, 4 individuals had shown symptoms of the same aggressive, tissue-destroying infection, each seemingly independent, yet all connected to a single patient, Cadosa. The hospital administration convened an emergency meeting. A temporary lockdown was ordered. The infected wing was sealed off, ventilation systems rerouted. Entry required full PPE, gowns, gloves, goggles, respirators. No exceptions. Staff were rotated out of high-risk zones every 4 hours. Exposure reports were filed. Biohazard protocols activated. Rumors circulated that the military medical corps had been alerted. The media hadn't caught wind of the situation, yet. But it was only a matter of time. Dr. Malan underwent surgery that evening. The infected tissue in his forearm had worsened dramatically. A black streak now ran from elbow to wrist. Surgeons attempted debridement, but it was clear the infection had reached the bone. Amputation was the only option. The decision was swift and without protest. Dr. Vusa stood in the hallway outside the surgical unit after signing the consent form, staring at her reflection in the window. Her hands shook as she clasped them together, not from fear of the disease, but from something deeper. Helplessness. She was supposed to be the calm center in the storm, but now she felt like a cork tossed in rising waters. How had this started? What had they missed? And worse, was it already too late to stop it? Ivana lay on the examination table, her body trembling as the fever deepened. Her lips moved, whispering words no one could quite hear. Perhaps she was praying. Perhaps she was trying to will herself back to strength. But her skin told a different story. The necrosis was spreading, faster than expected. The infected region on her thigh had doubled in size within hours. Patches of skin now carried a bluish tint, and where the tissue should have been firm, it gave way under the doctor's fingers like wet clay. She was taken into surgery that night. Dr. Vusa, though already exhausted, assisted. There was no question of detachment anymore. This was personal. She worked with precision, guiding the debridement as the surgical team removed layers of dying flesh from Ivana's leg. the tissue peeled back with ease, like paper soaked in oil. It was not just skin. Beneath the epidermis, pockets of infection clung to the fascia, invisible in standard imaging, visible only by feel and by instinct. Surgeons scraped, cut, irrigated with antiseptic, repeated the process. Hours passed. When it was over, Ivana's leg had been saved, but only just. She would carry the scars for life, and perhaps something deeper, a quiet sense of how close she had come to losing everything. Again, across the isolation ward, Anya sat alone in a sealed chamber, knees drawn to her chest. Her infection had advanced rapidly. The patches on her wrist now extended along her forearm. The IVs delivered antibiotics around the clock, but she could feel it. This wasn't working. She felt the burn in her shoulder, a stiffness in her jaw, and something else, fear that no one would admit aloud. She hadn't been cut. She hadn't broken the skin. She'd worn gloves. She had followed protocol. How then had it found her? Dr. Vusa visited her late that night. The girl's face was pale, drenched in sweat. She looked up from the cot with dull, desperate eyes. "I was careful," Anya whispered. "I swear." "I believe you," Vusa replied. The silence that followed said more than either of them could. In the lab, the team analyzing the bacterial samples from Kadosa's surgery began reporting findings. The initial results were shocking. A rare strain of Group A Streptococcus, yes, but showing markers that weren't listed in any known profile. A mutation, not just a simple variant. This strain produced exotoxins at a far higher rate, showed increased resilience to temperature shifts, and, most alarmingly, had adapted to, spread in conditions that were previously considered non-conducive, through semi-intact skin, and possibly via high-moisture air environments. It explained Anya. It explained Ivana. It explained the speed. A warning was issued to the regional health authority. A formal request was submitted to escalate containment procedures. The hospital's microbiologists labeled the new strain variant 47N pending classification. But labels didn't matter to the staff standing outside the sealed ICU, watching patients decline. They mattered even less to Ivana, now drifting in and out of consciousness, her hand weakly searching for Kadosa's fingers beside her. Or to Anya, who, hours later, began to seize. By dawn, she was gone. The official cause of death, toxic shock and systemic organ failure due to necrotizing fasciitis. Unofficially, her name was written in quiet sorrow on the whiteboard in the staff room, a reminder not just of her death, but of the invisible line they had all crossed, from medicine into something that looked more like war. In the days that followed, Ivanova Hospital remained under partial lockdown. The infected wing was a silent world behind sealed doors, where masked nurses moved like ghosts and the air hummed with filtered tension. A medical containment unit from the regional authority had arrived, setting up mobile labs and enforcing stricter biohazard protocols. But even among the scientists and suits, the mood was grim. 3 people had fallen: Kadosa, Ivana, Dr. Mullen. 4, if you counted Anya. She had died without ceremony, without family nearby, her body sealed in a containment bag and wheeled away before sunrise. She became a warning more than a memory. In the main hospital wing, Dr. Vera Vusa sat hunched over her desk, staring at the preliminary report. The lab analysis of the bacterial strain was chilling. It wasn't just Group A Streptococcus. This variant, labeled temporarily as 47N, carried genetic signatures resembling Vibrio vulnificus, a pathogen typically found in brackish water, often fatal in immunocompromised individuals. Somehow, a terrestrial flesh-eating bacterium had fused with a waterborne strain known for silent, rapid invasion. It shouldn't have been possible. But the cultures didn't lie. How had it entered a healthy 13-year-old girl with no wound, no exposure to seafood, no coastline within hundreds of miles? She leaned back, rubbing her temples. Her mind looped over everything she knew about Kadosa's case, until a sentence from the mother's admission interview echoed back. "We had just come from the store. She asked to play in the rain. That was it." She scrolled back through the notes. Played barefoot in puddles near roadside. Harmless, whimsical, normal. But it kept tugging at her. She stood up, left her office, and walked briskly toward the ICU. Ivana was stable now, awake but weak. Her leg had responded well to the antibiotics and debridement, though the damage would take months to fully repair. She sat upright in bed, her face drawn but clear-eyed, a mother's strength undiminished by fever. Dr. Vusa pulled up a chair. "I need to ask about that day," she said, "before all of this started." Ivana nodded slowly. "You mentioned the rain. You said you played together?" A small smile touched Ivana's lips despite everything. Yes. She asked me to stop the car. She'd never played in the rain before. Where was this? On the road just outside Koster, near the old fork in the path. There's a clearing near the trees. It floods easily when it rains. Dr. Vusa's breath caught. You were barefoot? Yes, Ivana said. We both were. A silence hung between them. And then, slowly, something shifted behind Ivana's eyes. There were puddles, she added, deep ones, with foam on top, and a strange smell. I remember thinking it was just the wet soil, but it was sharper than that. Do you recall any industrial runoff in that area? Farms? Factories? There was a pig farm. Abandoned, years ago. Waste tanks still there, I think, but everyone assumed it had dried out. It hadn't. By nightfall, Dr. Vusa and the hospital's epidemiology consultant were on the road, escorted by a team in protective gear. The path to the clearing was half washed away by recent rains. Fallen branches littered the trail. When they arrived at the puddles, the air was heavy with rot. Samples were taken from multiple sites. The water was thick, with a faint oily sheen across the surface. Bubbles formed and popped slowly. In the largest pool, near a downed pipe half buried in the mud, the stench was unbearable. Sour, chemical, organic. An unholy mix. Soil cores were collected. Water filtered, bottled, labeled. Bacterial swabs applied to stones, grass, and the interior of the cracked drainage pipe. Back at the hospital, the lab worked through the night. By morning, confirmation came. The puddles teemed with pathogens: Streptococcus pyogenes, Vibrio vulnificus, Enterococcus faecalis, and multiple unknown strains exhibiting high toxin output. Their interaction had likely created a recombinant mutation, an unstable hybrid, capable of entering the human body through microabrasions or even prolonged skin contact in high humidity conditions. There was no record of such a combination occurring naturally. The puddle had become a crucible, a perfect storm of organic waste, rainwater, and time. Cadosa had entered barefoot, perhaps with a scratch or slight irritation on her skin. The bacteria needed no invitation. They had slipped through invisible cracks, found warmth, and taken root. Dr. Vusa stood in the lab hallway, staring at the screen, showing magnified images of the bacteria. The writhing forms danced under fluorescent light, oblivious to the destruction they had caused. Something created this, she said quietly to the microbiologist beside her. Nature is full of accidents, he replied, and some of them are lethal. But this wasn't just nature, she murmured. No one responded. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the gray horizon, Dr. Vusa returned to the ICU. She stood between Ivana and Cadosa, both asleep, both fighting their own battles beneath the skin. For a moment she simply watched them breathe. There was a time, not long ago, when playing in the rain was an innocent act. A child's joy. A mother's indulgence. Now it was a story that would be told with caution, perhaps disbelief, and quiet dread. But the truth remained. The rain hadn't killed anyone. The silence in the soil had. Recovery is not always a straight path. For Cadosa, it began in fragments. The slow blink of consciousness returning. The sterile scent of antiseptic. The dull ache in her bones that told her something had been taken. In the earliest hours, she did not remember the pain or the surgery. Only the sound of rain tapping gently against a hospital window and the weight of her mother's hand on hers. Ivana was beside her, wrapped in her own cocoon of gauze and exhaustion. Her leg was elevated, a web of dressings and IV lines encasing what remained after the infection had been cut away. Though she could not walk without assistance, she sat upright each morning just to look at her daughter's face. That, she told the nurses, was her real medicine. The days passed in slow rotation. Every 12 hours, bandages were changed. Every 24, lab reports returned. Scans, scopes, and blood tests formed a new rhythm, clinical, precise, but strangely intimate. The human body, when broken, reveals more than blood and bone. It reveals resilience. Cadosa had survived, but survival carried its own scars. The infection had destroyed critical tissues in her pelvic region. Though the surgeons had saved her life and preserved her vital functions, there were uncertainties, questions about long-term fertility, hormonal balance, and the risk of chronic nerve damage. These were not answers her young mind was ready to absorb. For now she focused on movement, small things, flexing her toes, holding a spoon, sitting upright for 5 minutes at a time without vomiting. And always her mother was there, cheering softly, her voice calm but unshakable. Ivana's recovery was slower. Her leg, though spared from amputation, would never regain full strength. The tissue loss required grafting, and even with successful transplant, nerve function was reduced. She would walk again, but not without pain, not without assistance. But she never complained. The nurses whispered about her, the mother who refused sedatives, who refused to rest when her daughter needed her. There was a nobility in her suffering, a quiet defiance against the fragility of flesh. In a hospital where so much had gone wrong, the bond between them had become something sacred. Weeks later, as the storm outside gave way to a cool, dry August, Dr. Vusa sat across from them in a recovery consultation. Cardosa was able to speak freely now. Her hair, once matted with sweat and saline, had been washed and tied back in a soft braid. Her voice, though thin, carried clarity. "Will it come back?" she asked. Dr. Vusa didn't pretend to misunderstand. The infection? No. Not this strain. We caught it in time. But you'll need follow-ups. For months, maybe years. And will I? Cardosa hesitated. Will I be able to have children? Ivana's hand tightened around hers. Dr. Vusa chose her words carefully. It's too early to say for sure. Some structures were affected, but the body is resilient, and medicine has come a long way. We'll walk that path when we get there. It was the kindest answer she could give. After the meeting, Ivana sat alone on the bench outside the recovery wing. She watched the sky, cloudless now, the light mellow and golden, the same light that had once illuminated the puddles where it all began. She didn't cry, not anymore. She had cried enough in the early hours, when the diagnosis was spoken aloud, when she'd signed the consent for her own surgery, when she'd watched a young nurse die in a sealed room down the hall. Now, the tears were inward, folded into memory. What remained was gratitude, and something deeper, resolve. At the far end of the hospital wing, a rehabilitation therapist guided Cardosa through breathing exercises. She winced as she stretched, her abdomen tight, muscles aching. But she didn't stop. For a girl who had once feared she was dying, every breath now was an act of rebellion. Elsewhere in the hospital, Dr. Milan sat quietly in his private room, staring at the stump where his arm had been. The amputation had been clean, the recovery uneventful. He was adjusting to prosthetics, learning one-handed routines, nodding politely at visitors. But inside, he grieved, not for the limb, but for the patients he had failed to protect, for the silence that followed Anya's passing, for the question that echoed in his mind. Had he hesitated? Had he missed something? Could he have warned them earlier? These were the invisible wounds, and in medicine, they often healed the slowest. When the hospital finally cleared the last of the isolation protocols, it was September. Autumn had arrived in Koster, brushing the trees with hints of gold and rust, and laying cool fingers over the hills that had, for a time, held their breath. Ivana and Cardosa were discharged on the same day. The journey home was quiet, not somber but reverent. Their old beige car, now fitted with hand grips and padded seating, rolled along the familiar gravel path that led from the hospital to the countryside. Trees blurred past in soft greens and browns. The road curved gently, no urgency, no race. They didn't speak much. Sometimes words aren't necessary. When they pulled into their driveway, the garden stood as they had left it, overgrown, a little wild but still living. Ivy clung to the fence posts. A single sunflower, bent from weeks of wind, leaned toward the house like an old friend welcoming them home. Inside, the house was cool and still. Dust lay lightly over the furniture. The scent of old wood and closed air greeted them like memory. Ivana helped her daughter to her room. The crutches made it slow but not impossible. Each step was a small act of defiance, a proof of life. Later, when the sun began to dip below the trees, they walked together, limping and leaning, toward the edge of their property, where the forest met the road. There, in the distance, was the clearing where it had all begun. The rain-worn puddles were long gone. What remained was dry earth, scattered leaves, and the faint imprint of tire tracks. But Ivana recognized the place by feel. A knowing settled into her bones. She led Cardosa by the hand. Together, they planted a small wooden post at the edge of the path. At its base, they placed a stone painted with a child's handprint and the date of the rain. Beneath it, a plaque. It read, "What we survive shapes who we become." Neither of them spoke, but the air carried something with it, not sorrow, not relief, but understanding. In the days that followed, life resumed, slowly, unevenly, but earnestly. Neighbors stopped by with flowers and soup. The village priest came to offer prayer. The mailman delivered a letter from the regional health department, thanking Ivana for her early report, acknowledging her part in identifying the source of the outbreak. The letter was formal, but Ivana didn't need thanks. She needed healing. Healing came in many forms: therapy sessions via video call, gentle exercises prescribed by the rehabilitation nurse, silent mornings with tea and the rustle of birds outside the kitchen window. Cadosa returned to drawing, her hands still steady, her lines more intricate than before. She drew the clearing, the puddles, the frogs, but now she added the sky. Always the sky. One morning Cadosa asked, "Do you think it will happen again?" Ivana paused, then answered truthfully, "Maybe, but we'll be ready next time." And they would be. Across the country, the case became a reference in medical journals. Patient Zero was anonymized, the location kept vague, but the findings sparked international discussion. Biohazard researchers studied the bacterial hybrid. Hospitals updated protocols. Families talked about rain differently. But for Cadosa and Ivana, the legacy wasn't in papers or headlines, it was in silence, in the quiet recognition of fragility, and the strength to face it. Months later, they returned to the hospital, not as patients, but as guests. Dr. Vusa had invited them to speak at a staff seminar. She introduced them with words of gratitude, but more than that, with respect. When Cadosa stood at the front of the small auditorium, she didn't speak long. She simply said, "I thought I was going to die, but I didn't, because people didn't give up on me, and because my mom was there, every minute." There were no dry eyes in the room. Dr. Malan, seated in the front row, clenched the prosthetic hand attached to his left wrist and nodded. After the talk, the three of them stood in the hallway together, 3 survivors, each carrying different scars. They shared coffee in paper cups. No one mentioned Anya, but her absence hung gently among them, like a name written in light. As they left, Dr. Vusa pressed something into Ivana's hand. It was a photograph, taken from the security camera on the night they arrived at the hospital. In it, Ivana was holding her daughter in both arms, rain pouring down, determination etched into her face. "Frame it," the doctor said, "so you never forget what it looks like when love refuses to surrender." Ivana did frame it. It hangs now in their hallway, just beside the door. Visitors always stop to look. Some ask questions. Most just stare a little longer than usual, because there's something in it, something quiet, strong, and enduring, like rain on the skin. Some stories don't end with victory, they end with silence. Not the silence of absence or despair, but the kind that lingers, like the last drop of rain sliding down a window pane, or the hush of a hospital hallway after the lights are dimmed. It's the silence of memory, of reverence, of lessons not shouted, but quietly understood. This was one of those stories. Cadosa and Ivana didn't return from war with medals or headlines. Their survival didn't come with fanfare or applause. There were no parades, only recovery, slow, painful, personal. But that's the kind of survival that shapes a person, because some storms don't rage outside. They bloom inside the body, inside the bloodstream, inside the very tissue that holds us together. And sometimes survival isn't measured by how loudly we fight, but by how quietly we endure. After everything, the diagnosis, the surgeries, the losses, Cadosa still wakes with a limp. Her mother still has days when the ache in her leg makes stairs feel like mountains, and Dr. Malan still buttons his shirt one-handed, carefully, deliberately, every morning. But they are alive, and that alone is something sacred. We live in a world that often praises strength as something loud, muscles, speed, dominance. But there is another kind of strength, the kind that doesn't ask for attention, the kind that cries at night and shows up anyway in the morning, the kind that survives loss and carries love forward, no matter how heavy. Ivana embodies that strength. So does Cadosa, and so do you. If you've ever walked through something dark, something painful, and found your way back to the light, even if your steps were slow. Because the truth is, we're all survivors of something. Maybe not of infection or surgery, but of heartbreak, of regret, of fear, of moments where the world shifted and didn't ask our permission. And in that shared humanity, stories like this find their purpose. They remind us that life is fragile, but that fragility is not a flaw. It's what makes life precious. That danger can come from where we least expect, but so can strength. That we don't have to be perfect to be resilient. We only have to keep going. And that love, the real kind, the kind that shows up in waiting rooms and holds your hand through beeping monitors, is the one medicine we can never bottle, but always trust. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this: cherish the ordinary. Hold on to the people who show up when things get hard, and never ever take a moment of peace for granted. Because sometimes peace is hard won, and sometimes it's just one decision, a stop by the roadside, a step into the rain, that changes everything. Cardosa didn't ask for this story, but she's telling it now, quietly, through her art, through her eyes, through the way she notices puddles differently, through the way she listens longer when someone says they're hurting. Ivana didn't plan to become a symbol of strength. She just refused to let her daughter face fear alone. Dr. Mullen didn't know he'd lose a limb, but he never let it make him less of a healer. And Anya, young, bright, full of kindness, didn't get to write the rest of her story. But her page, though short, remains one of the most important in this chapter. So to you, the listener, the viewer, the soul behind the screen, thank you. Thank you for giving this story time. Thank you for allowing it to enter your thoughts and maybe, just maybe, shift your perspective. Because the world needs more people who listen, who feel, who understand that every face in a hospital bed is someone's whole world, that every routine infection can carry terror, that every nurse, every doctor, every mother, every child carries a story we may never fully know. But we can honor it, we can carry it, and in doing so, we carry a little more humanity forward. So here's what we ask of you now. Don't just walk away. Think, feel, reflect. And if you've ever had a moment, one small choice, that changed everything, we want to hear it. Leave us a comment below. Tell us about the time you learned something the hard way. Tell us what this story made you feel, or just leave a heart, so we know you're out there listening. And if you believe in stories that matter, not for clicks, not for shock, but for connection, subscribe. It's the simplest way to say, keep going. These stories are worth telling. We're not a channel, we're a community. And you're part of it now. Until next time, stay safe, stay soft in all the right places, and strong where it counts most, because the quiet we carry is often the loudest thing we leave behind. But before we close, let us offer one last thought. Rain will fall again. Somewhere, someone will step barefoot into a puddle, laughing. And that's okay, because life can't be lived entirely in fear. It shouldn't be. The lesson is not to stop living. It's to live with awareness, to understand that risk exists, not to avoid joy, but to appreciate it fully. That the things we take for granted, clean water, safe hospitals, compassionate caregivers, are gifts. And that behind every breakthrough, every survival, there are names we will never hear, people who fought battles we'll never see. So if today's story touched something in you, tell someone. Call your mother. Hug your child. Send a message you've been putting off. And when it rains, listen. Really listen. Let it remind you that every drop that falls is a moment that matters. We thank you truly for walking with us to the end of this story. And if you're still here, you're one of the rare ones. The ones who stay, who feel, who carry meaning in a world that moves too fast. We see you, and we're grateful.